Good morning, good morning, good morning. Today is April 22nd. It is Earth Day. It is Wednesday. It is the day before you take your DBQ experiment, and good luck with that. So let's begin by talking about that DBQ. Once again, the key to scoring on the DBQ, I paused because it's hard for me to imagine that they assign so much credit to, basically it's one question, but the key is, once again, understanding this. I'm going to go turn the light on so it's a little bit better behind me. You'll pardon me. Sorry. Yes, the illumination is somewhat better. And so the key is knowing the rubric. And so what do you have to know? Well, you have to, you begin, the first paragraph is context. In other words, what things happened historically, and you can talk in very general terms here, preceding the question, It can be general, but it has to be tied to the question. You can't start out with the chapter 1, verse 1 of Genesis in the Old Testament. That really wouldn't help you at all. So you have to be specific, but it can be, general. This is what happened. This is, the background of this question. And then your thesis. Now, your thesis goes in the first paragraph. You want to write your thesis after you have read the documents. Yeah. After you've read the documents. Let me start over. So let's say we're answering this thing tomorrow. And remember, you only got 45 minutes. Although tomorrow I give you 47. First thing you do, you read the question. And you understand, what is the question asking for? Is it asking for change in continuity over time, which would be my best bet. In other words, how something has changed over time. Or would it be asking you to compare A to B? Okay, that kind of question. Or would it be a causation question? This caused that. And so, yeah, you read the question, understand the question, and, you might even, if you have a notepad next to you, just quickly write out, I know this about that, this about that, this about that, some little notes. Just do it fast. And then you read the 5 documents. Now, once again, do not read the documents blind. And I would almost guarantee you that probably one of the 5 documents is going to be something visual, a cartoon, a graph, a picture of some sort, painting of some sort, but even if that's true, the first thing you do in all 5 documents, look at where did the document come from? Is it a speech made by a government official? Is it a personal letter from one person to another? And, is it a few words from someone's personal journal, for example? Is it an article in a newspaper? Is it a cartoon in a satirical magazine, or a painting that reflected romanticism at the time? And so you read, before you read the document, read what the source is first. And then you read the document. And, if I was you, I would just put Doc 1 and then just quick summarization of what it says. Doc 2, same thing. Makes it easy reference. You know, you have you have your pen, have your piece of paper in your next hand, and read all the documents. And if document 1 agrees with document 4, make note of that. Okay. And then, you know, you get a sense of where this question is going. And so the documents are put there to help you answer the question. I mean, that's the whole point of this type of question. They want to see your ability to be able to read material and understand not just what it says, but to source it. Who said it? Why did they say it? You know. Okay. All right. And so you have your thesis now, and your thesis once again addresses the question. Okay. Does not repeat the question. It addresses the question. It takes a position, an historically defensible position. You cannot say space aliens did it. It has to be historically defensible. And you then basically you're going to have 2 paragraphs in your essay that talk about the documents. And, you know, I would say, like, you know, the answer to the question is this. While some people said this, other people said that. You know, show complexity, show that you understand it. You know, like, for example, your women's question yesterday, or whenever it was, Thursday. You know, women's rights opened up a little bit during the Reformation. Divorce was easier, things of that nature, because of Martin Luther. The idea that all children should be taught to read. During the Enlightenment, whereas the Enlightenment was all about science, they actually simply manufactured reasons to defend their position that women were inferior. You know, and there you are. And then you have 5 documents, and group the documents in paragraphs, and it'll be a 2-3. I guarantee you that the paragraphs are going to be 2-3. 2 of them are going to agree with each other, and 3 of them are going to agree with each other. And they'll take differing positions or show differing transitions. And so, yeah. And then that's your, as you write paragraph 2 and 3, remember, don't just say what the document said, say how that applies to your thesis. And for all 5 of them, who said it? And by who, it doesn't just mean the guy's name. Who is this person? I mean, is it the Prime Minister of Great Britain, for example? Is it the King of Louis XIV of France who said it, speaking as a monarch? Is it the editor of some newspaper? Who's he talking to? Is he talking to his newspaper audience? Is he trying to, as a prime minister, get passage of an act in Parliament? Is he running for election? Is the picture trying to draw attention to the plight of the Irish? You know. So those kind of things, you know, in the paragraphs. And then that takes us to our 4th paragraph. 4th paragraph, try to come up with 2 pieces of information and label them. Label the information. This is outside information, big capital letters in parentheses. That, you know, there's something else that is pertinent to this question. You see, that happened. If you get 2, that's gold. And then finally, I say in that same 4th paragraph, and label it your complex understanding. complex understanding, complexity, that, what, these questions are going this way. But you know what? There's also an undercurrent going in the other way. There's also something different. Or, I still think synthesis is a good thing. I still think that if you can think of some other question in history that happened, for example, the struggle of women and discrimination against women. Are there any other peoples that you can think of throughout history who have been the subject of discrimination? Yeah, that might be good to get that, point. And there it is, a 4-paragraph essay. If you wanted to add a 5th one, restate the thesis and move on. But, I think, I'm sorry, 5-paragraph, a 5-paragraph essay. If you wanted to add a 6th and restate the thesis, I guess you could, but I think you should be good with 5. No, 4. I'm so dumb. First paragraph, context thesis. Second and third paragraphs, discuss the documents. Fourth paragraph, outside information. And then you go for your complexity point. Go for all of it. Go for all of it. And if you run out of time, you run out of time. But go down swinging. Please. Okay. Now, if you notice in Canvas under assignments, I sent you already. If you don't have that, I'll give you a second to pull it up. Yeah, in Canvas, I not only sent you a couple of videos from. I didn't use Tom this morning, but yeah. And I also sent you Chapter 13, the paths, successful and unsuccessful. Oh boy, where are we at? Right there. Successful and unsuccessful paths. Successful and unsuccessful paths to power. Give me a sec while I do this. Get this all fixed. Give me a sec. Give me a sec right there. Let's pull me over so that I can read without looking at you and squinting and you're thinking, what is he looking at? Yeah, that's better. Okay. So hopefully now you have your study guide. Once again, this unit deals primarily with France and England and how the government of England moved toward constitutionalism and the government of France towards absolutism. And there, I don't have to discuss anymore. I've discussed the whole thing. Yeah. And the bottom line of whether or not England went towards constitutionalism and France toward absolutism hinges on 2 things. Number one was the simple fact that England has long benefited from the fact, England, Britain, the UK, has long benefited from the fact it's an island. Yeah, that island, that natural protective barrier that has saved England again and again since 1066. And so since the English didn't have to spend all that money on a military, a standing army, then because it does take a lot of money, to have a standing army, then since there was no standing army, and since you have to remember that monarchs who had large standing armies to stand around more often used the army to suppress the local populations than I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. But anyway, monarchs would use the armies to suppress local populations who were protesting, who were demonstrating, then they actually used them to defend the borders. And so, yeah, England takes a more tolerant path, more, and this doesn't happen right away. England doesn't become an automatic democracy. Trust me, no, not by any stretch of the imagination. But, you know, differences of opinion in England slowly were tolerated. And the other half of that coin is money. The French government, the French monarch, was more efficient at collecting taxes than the English monarch. The English monarch had to negotiate with the nobility and with the commoners to get the taxes he or she needed. Whereas the French monarch just took them. Okay, let's see. Roman numeral I, Part A. Only monarchies that had built a secure financial base, which was not dependent upon the support of estates, diets, or assemblies of nobles, achieved absolute rule. You say, what does that mean? Meaning, what I just told you, that it all depended upon how efficient was the monarchy at taking money, at raising money. If the monarch had to depend upon nobility, if he had to depend upon councils, if he had to depend upon anything besides, you know, himself to get the money, he would not be as efficient a monarch. The French kings developed an efficient way of sucking money out of the populace. The English failed, and as a result of that failure, you have the formation of Parliament and constitutionalism. Yeah. So even Louis XIV, the Sun King, Louis XIV is used there not because we're talking about Louis XIV now, but because Louis XIV is the prototype of what a absolute monarch is in modern European civilization. He's the prototype. He's the one that when Peter the Great, when Frederick the Great, and when all the other monarchs, absolute monarchs of Europe, they say, I want to be a monarch, they say, I want to be like Louis XIV. But even Louis XIV had to depend somewhat on the cooperation of the local nobilities for money and authority. In England, the problem was radical religion. Yes, radical religion was the problem. With the Puritans having a heavy hand in France, Louis XIV will crush Protestant resistance. In England, Parliament, and I misspelled Parliament there. Oh, I didn't spell. Oh. Parliament had developed a tradition of an expectation of being consulted on taxes and laws made in repeal. You know, what was the English Parliament? The English Parliament was first put together a long time ago, prior to our scope of study, when, to be honest, the English king needed money. And so he sent out a decree saying that he wanted to have a meeting of all representatives of all the nobility and representatives of the free landed peasants, people who own property. And the nobility became the House of Lords, and the representatives of the free peasants, the free landowning peasants, the commoners became the House of Commons. And Henry II said, hey, I need some money. And they gave it to him. And then they began to think, you know what? If we're going to give him money, we should get something out of it. And once again, this is called the power of the purse. Okay? And so, yeah, in England, the Parliament had the power of the purse, meaning that whenever the English king wanted money, Parliament would say, okay, we'll give you some money, but what are you going to do for us? It's called power of the purse. Okay. In France, their legislature was something called the Estates General, representatives of the three estates. It was nothing more than a figurehead. France at this time, when we began the chapter, was led by two capable churchmen in Cardinal Richelieu and Cardinal Jules Mazarin. Both of Cardinal Richelieu served as regent for Louis XIII, and Jules Mazarin served as regent for Louis XIV. England at the time was led by the Stuart Kings, a weak line of kings to say the least. James I was a Stuart. John I, no. That should be Charles. Let me fix that. Finally fixed that. Charles I was a Stuart. Yeah, so it's James I, Charles I, Charles II, and James II. Those were the Stuart kings. And I guess you could include Anne as a Stuart. But, you know, they're one of the weaker lines of English kings. In both England and France, however, the nobility were on top of the social scale. The French needed to cater to the monarchy, and the king returned the favor. He protected, in France, their tax exemptions. Yeah, the king in France, the nobility paid no taxes. The king protected their tax exemptions, their wealth, and their social standing. Now, James I succeeded Elizabeth I after her death in the year 1603. James was technically a Protestant, not well known. His mother had been executed. His mother, once again, was Mary, Queen of Scots, accused of plotting against the Queen. James, however, was a strong advocate of the divine rights of kings. He had written a pamphlet called A True Law of Free Monarchies. He rarely met Parliament, didn't intend to do so, because after all, he didn't see the need. He didn't understand this whole negotiating with Parliament to get money thing. For income, he rather illegally began to take new levies called impositions, also called tonnage and poundage. You say, what does that mean? Basically, it was a tax based on the weight of goods transported and traded in England. But religious problems was a thing with James and his administration. The Puritans within the Church of England sought to make the national church more and more conservative. I mean, they were troublemakers. In January 1604, James issued the Millinery Petition at a special religious conference at Hampton Court. What you should remember about James regarding religion is that James is the one he doesn't write the King James Version of the Bible, but he proffers, he pushes forward, he makes somebody else translate the Bible into English, which has become the standard version of the Bible in English-speaking nations. Which, if you've ever read the King James Version of the Bible, as I have, it really reads like Shakespeare. And that's not a coincidence, because Shakespeare was written, maybe 100 years or so before the King James Version of the Bible. James and the Puritans also disagreed over the Sabbath, Sunday. Puritans felt that Sunday was only for religion. James felt that games and sports. I like it when textbooks, they say games and sports. What that means is gambling. What that means is the pit fighting, the bear baiting, the bare knuckle boxing, the taverns, the brothels, the theaters, things of that nature. He thought that if we kept these open on Sunday, that would encourage Catholics, that the Anglican faith was a fun faith, and to come into the Church of England. In 1620, as you all know, because you dress up every year at Thanksgiving, 1620, a group of these Puritans who just got sick of the Anglican Church in England, then they went to the Netherlands, they got sick of the tolerance of the Netherlands, and they said, we're going to go to North America and establish a Zion in the wilderness on Mount Zion Road there in Union, Kentucky. No. A Zion in the wilderness, meaning a holy city set upon a hill. That's the reference to Zion. And so, 1620, they founded Plymouth Colony in Massachusetts. in order to get away from the Church of England, which they did. And they set up one of the most meanest, unfun, I'm telling you, you can't say enough negative things about Puritans, if you ask me, even though President John Adams was a Puritan. But they were really, really hard on anybody who was different from them. But yeah, so they set up this colony in 1620 in Massachusetts. The James administration was racked by scandal. He, James, used favorites. The Duke of Buckingham, for example, who was supposed to be the king's homosexual lover, may have well been, sold peerages and titles to the highest bidder, a practice that kind of hacked off the nobility who had been born to their titles. James' foreign policy also came under scrutiny. He concluded a peace treaty with Spain. The Protestants in England saw this as a pro-Catholic move. He also tried to arrange a marriage between his son Charles I, and the Spanish Infanta, the daughter of the King of Spain. James approached his death, and more his kingdom was in the hands of Charles I and this guy, the Duke of Buckingham. When he died, England entered into a continental war against Spain just to satisfy the anti-Catholic Parliament. Now, Charles I succeeded James I. So when Charles I became king, Parliament immediately greeted Charles with a document called the Petition of Right, basically a document saying that, you know, your dad was a jerk, and we don't want to have to put up with that anymore. This is what we're going to do, and this is what you're going to do. And as it says there, it's a document basically limiting the right of the king to wage war and levy taxes. Charles agreed to the petition, but he knew, and everybody else knew, he was not going to honor his word. Because after all, he's king. Charles entered into a peace agreement with the French to conserve his money so that he could handle things back home. He also instituted a policy known as a thorough, which was a way for Charles to rule more directly. He also placed a tax known as ship money on the whole of England to pay for naval protection. Once again, without consent and advice of Parliament. And that was exactly what the Petition of Right had said we're not going to do. However, it was Charles' religion that got him into the soup. William Land, his advisor, wanted him to get all the English and Scottish churches to conform to Anglicanism. The Scots rebelled, of course, because they were Puritans. Charles needed money, and the Parliament was not going to give him money to put down this revolt. Parliament at the time was led by a guy named John Pym. King Charles I dissolved the Parliament, said you all go home, and this was called the Short Parliament. When Presbyterian Scots invaded and defeated an English army, John Pym reconvened what became known as the Long Parliament. The Long Parliament was divided over the precise direction to take on religious reform. Both moderate Puritans and the Presbyterians, and the more extreme Puritans, the Independents, wanted to abolish the Episcopal system and the Book of Common Prayer. The majority of the Presbyterians wanted to allow Calvinist-type reforms and a fully decentralized church. How did I spell that wrong? Yeah, a fully decentralized church, meaning a church that made its own decisions at the local level. Conservatives of both houses of Parliament wanted to preserve the English church in its current form. A rebellion broke out in Ireland, and Parliament, led by John Pym, said Parliament could not trust Charles with an army, and that Parliament should lead the army themselves. Charles thought that this division within the Parliament was his chance to reassert his authority over the crown, and on December 1st, 1641, Charles was presented with a document called the Grand Remonstrance, 200-page article summary of popular and parliamentary grievances against the king. He, Charles, sent an army to Parliament to arrest Pym and the other conspirators, but they had already escaped. The House of Commons passed military ordinance which gave Parliament the right to raise its own army. Thus begins the English Civil War, a war between the forces of King Charles I king and the Parliament. The war began in August of 1641 and was fought over two main issues. Would an absolute monarchy or a parliamentary monarchy, a limited monarchy, a constitutional monarchy, rule England? 2, would English religion be controlled by the king's bishops and conform to Anglican practice, or adopt a decentralized Presbyterian system of church governance? Charles supporters were called Cavaliers and were primarily located in the northwestern half of England. The Roundheads, the supporters of the Parliament, were largely Puritan and came from the southwest. The war divided England chiefly along religious lines. Puritans tended to favor Parliament, which gave the Parliament one great advantage, and that advantage was Oliver Cromwell. Good general, real jerk. As many good generals are, real jerks. Oliver Cromwell led the Puritans, the Roundheads, to victory and then claimed the leadership of England for 11 years. So Oliver Cromwell, once they get rid of Charles I, he gets beheaded, will rule England for 11 years. This is called the Cromwellian period. What eventually led to the Puritan victory was an alliance with with the Scots. And when John Pym persuaded Parliament to accept the terms of the Solemn League and Covenant, the second factor, of course, was the leadership of Cromwell. He was, tough hombre, whose primary concern was the freedom of worship of extreme Puritanism. Cromwell led the Allies to victory at Marston Moor and Naseby, and then formed the independent Rump Parliament, who had been reduced in number by Colonel Thomas Pride, used its power to convene a special court and had Charles IV executed as common criminal. What do you have to remember about all that? Well, the Puritans won, the Roundheads won, and Charles I gets beheaded. So that's what you remember about the English Civil War. From 1649 to 1660, England became officially a Puritan republic, a government run by the laws of Puritanism, to which I say, yikes. And during this time, he also conquered Ireland, which they will not let go of until 1922, and Scotland, and this created the single political entity known as Great Britain. Yes, Oliver Cromwell created Great Britain, which means England, what we now call Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, Great Britain. So Parliament then tried to disband the 50,000-man army, and Cromwell marched in and disbanded Parliament. And for the next 11 years, Cromwell will rule as Lord Protector until his death in 1660. Cromwell was basically, he is the epitome of the no fun king. I mean, for example, Cromwell was a devout Puritan. He wasn't, just somebody who was all about Cromwell. He was a devout Puritan. I mean, for example, one of the first things he did was he took the crown jewels, the English crown, and sold them off, had them destroyed, had them broken up, melted down, and sold off for the English treasury to use for money. He outlawed Christmas. Yeah, Christmas. He made England into a Puritan republic. Boring. Yeah, harsh. Puritanical laws. So this military dictatorship proved to be just as harsh and hated. In fact, more so than that of Charles I. His budget tripled the budget of Charles I. Cromwell was as intolerant of Anglicans as Charles had been of the Puritans. He also shut down the brothels, the taverns, the racetracks, the gaming houses. Gaming houses means houses of prostitution. Also gambling houses. All those things that might be looked upon as fun. Political liberty in Great Britain vanished in favor of this new religious extremism. By his death in 1660, most of England was ready to put a king right back on the throne. And so, Parliament, once Oliver Cromwell died and Oliver's son wanted nothing to do with being a king, Parliament said, who should be our king? Well, of course, the king is chosen by God, and his, they still had that divine rights of kings thing hanging out. And they said, oh, Charles I had a son, Charles II. Let's go ask him. He was living in exile at the time in Paris. And so they said, hey, that little disagreement we had with your dad where, we cut his head off. How would you like to have the same job? And Charles II took it. He's like, I'm not doing anything else. And so, Charles II was returned to the throne in 1642. His return marked the status quo of the English monarchy. He was an hereditary monarch. So that meant that the Stuart line would move on. They instituted an Anglican church with no bishops or prayer book, supreme in religion. So they made some compromises. Charles, however, had sympathies that ran with the Roman Catholic Church, favored religious toleration, which allowed for free worship as long as the worshiper is loyal to the king. Oh, yeah. Now, please write this down somewhere in your notes. When Charles II was brought back, it was called the Restoration. The restoration of the English monarchy. And Charles II, when he was restored to the monarchy, this is not written down there, by the way. When he was restored to the English monarchy, you got to remember that the guy had watched his own father get his head cut off. It must have given him cause to pause, meaning that he was thinking that, if I make trouble, the same thing's going to happen to me. So what do? Don't make trouble, but you're king. You can't make trouble, but you're king. What can you do? Answer, one word, partay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Charles II becomes known as the Merry Monarch because that's what he does. And to be honest, that's what England does. It partays. All 11 years, no alcohol, no gambling houses, no, pit fighting, bear baiting, all the fun activities. Unless you were a bear or a dog, all the fun activities. 11 years of pent-up boredom. England, blew off, went off, partied like it was 1999. And under Charles II, England becomes known as Merry Old England. That's where the term comes from. So, Parliament, however, did... getting back to Charles and his allegiance to the Roman Catholic faith, Parliament did not think that one could be a Catholic and a loyal Englishman at the same time. And so Charles had to kind of be very cautious with this whole Catholic thing. Parliament passed a series of codes known as the Clarendon Codes, which excluded Roman Catholics, Presbyterians, and Independents from political offices. The laws also imposed penalties for attending non-Anglican worship service, particularly Roman Catholic worship services. In Ireland, you couldn't participate in a Roman Catholic public service on pain of death. Under Charles II, England entered into a series of economic wars against their Dutch sea rivals and enlisted the help of France to do it. In the Treaty of Dover, England was allied to France in a secret provision of this treaty. Charles promised to announce his conversion to Catholicism as soon as conditions in England permitted. In an attempt to unite England behind the war effort and to show support for Louis XIV of France, he passed the Declaration of Indulgence in 1672. If there's anything that ever sounded like Catholicism, It's a declaration of indulgence. The Conservative Parliament shot this down. Charles rescinded that declaration. Parliament also passed the Test Act. The Test Act, which included, or rather required all officials of the crown to swear an oath against the doctrine of transubstantiation. Transubstantiation, that belief that when you receive the host and drink the wine, that it becomes the body and blood of Christ and when you consume it, which is a cornerstone belief of Roman Catholicism. And so if you were going to be an official of the crown, you had to take an oath saying you didn't believe that, meaning that you weren't a Catholic. That was directly aimed primarily at the brother of the king, James II, who was an ardent Roman Catholic. In 1678, a man named Titus Oates swore before a magistrate, lawyer, that Charles II's wife was plotting with Jesuits and Irishmen to kill the king so that James could assume the throne. This was called the Popish plot. And many were tried and executed. You have to forgive me for laughing about that. Jesuits and Irishmen, they're just in league with Satan. The Popish plot, many were executed. For the rest of his reign, Charles avoided calling together Parliament by utilizing Louis XIV's favors. In other words, he got Louis XIV to help him out, and using duty collection. Duty collection has nothing to do with diapers, but duty collection is about collecting taxes on imports. When he died, he had converted to Catholicism. So yeah. Now that left the throne to James II. James II, very old himself, had no living heirs. And so even though James II was an ardent Catholic, Parliament said, oh, the old man's going to die soon anyway, so just leave him alone. James II demanded and received the repeal of the Test Act, which was against Catholicism. He imprisoned 7 Anglican bishops who refused to publicize his suspension of laws against Catholicism. James also made overtures, hints that he was going to return England back to Roman Catholicism. But once again, Parliament like, yeah, talk, old man, we don't care. Until James II got married again, and his wife ended up being expecting, and she gave birth to a son. And what that did was everybody in Parliament said, oh no, now we're going to have to live forever and ever with Catholic monarchs. And so Parliament said, we got to do something. And what they did was a coalition of both parties, the Whigs and the Tories. Political parties, I mean, that's the kind of thing you need to know, because there's always a good chance that your DBQ could have something to do with English history. It's the most popular country as far as subject-wise in our subject. Whigs supported the Parliament, Tories supported the king. Whigs supported the Parliament, Tories supported the king. So a Whig and Tory coalition, members of both parties, offered the throne of England to Mary, who was James II's oldest daughter, but she had married William of Orange, a Dutch Protestant. William brought his army to England and didn't really need to because he was unopposed. So he brought it to preserve traditional liberties, they called it, the Anglican Church and parliamentary government. This marked the beginning of what has been called the Glorious Revolution or the Bloodless Revolution. Glorious Revolution or bloodless, no blood. Sin sangria. Yeah. Sin sangri means no blood. Revolution. Nobody got killed. No monarch got his head cut off, etc., etc. As part of the deal, though, William and Mary had to recognize a Bill of Rights. that limited the power of the monarchy and guaranteed certain civil liberties of the English privileged classes. Bill of Rights, I mean, kind of like the first 10 amendments to the Constitution of the United States. A Bill of Rights, which guarantees individual liberties. Yeah, that was part of the deal. One of those Bill of Rights was something called Habeas Corpus. Habeas Corpus, Habeas Corpus. You're going, oh no, what does that mean? Where's my Latin when I need it? Habeas Corpus. Habeas means to have. Corpus means corpus, the body. Once again, means you have the body. It means that habeas corpus means that you have the right to know why you are being detained, arrested, taken to jail. That's the first thing they have to tell you. You're being arrested for, and then they have to tell you the crime. No Miranda rights yet. But yeah, it's a very important act, habeas corpus, that you be told why you're being detained. Why? So you can then prepare a defense. You can then, call up witnesses. You can get an attorney. So, English monarchs would from now forward be subject to law themselves and would rule only through consent of Parliament. They would rule, but by consent of Parliament. So the power in English government is now about 50-50. Parliament, king. Toleration Act of 1689 permitted worship by all Protestants, but outlawed Roman Catholics and anti-Trinitarians. The Act of Settlement, the Revolution Settlement, the Act of Settlement, 1701, provided, 1, English crown would go to the Protestant House of Hanover in Germany if none of the children of Anne were alive at her death. And Queen Anne, who was the younger sister of Mary, William married, actually outlived all of her children. That seemed to bear out the work of John Locke, 1690, Second Treatise of Government. The Glorious Revolution, however, did provide a permanent check on the power of the king by the Parliament. The English government had also provided itself with a financial base, for which it would now use for a century of warfare, because in England, going forward, everyone gets taxed, including the nobility. Okay. So tomorrow we're going to start talking about France, okay? Which, why don't we just put that there? We'll talk, and tomorrow I'll be short as far as my lecture goes, because you have a big, you have a 47-minute assignment. So I'll have a shorter class because, I don't want to overburden you. But yeah. Tomorrow, good luck on writing your essay. And we'll begin again tomorrow. And so let me put this away. Have a good day. It's a beautiful day to get outside. Enjoy Earth Day. Good morning, starshine. The Earth says hello. And yeah.